Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the fourth Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1930 and 1931. Norman Taurog adapted the comic strip Skippy into a film of the same name starring Jackie Cooper. The film was so much of a success that a sequel was released the very same year. Skippy earned 4 Oscar nominations, including for 9-year-old Jackie Cooper in Best Actor. Norman Taurog won Best Director, but it was the Western epic Cimarron that won Best Picture in the end. So how did Skippy come up short? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to Skippy. Welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, and we are down to our final 5 episodes here, and we are entering a newer era for me in terms of not having to talk about more than 5 Best Picture nominees, so let's celebrate that. And I also wanted to bring back for one last episode here at the end one of my favorite guest through many decades of Oscar history. So you first heard him talking The Curious Case of Benjamin Button and the films of 2008, Moonstruck and the films of 1987, Judgment at Nuremberg and the films of 1961, and The Bells of St. Mary's and the films of 1945. He also joined me for episodes of On Second Thought about Manchester by the Sea and Sideways and Ghost, writer of his blog The Awards Connection and other sites like Awards Watch. Welcome back, Andrew Carden.
Hey Kevin, how's it going?
It is going. How about
Excellent. I'm just excited to discuss what might be the greatest Best Picture lineup of all time.
I mean, pound for pound, so many classics, you know?
I was floored.
Truly. I mean, we'll get to it. We will get to it. Oh boy. All right. So today we are talking about the 1930 to 1931 awards season, and the Best Picture winner was a movie called Cimarron. Excited to dive into that one later on, but I have decided that the runner-up is Skippy based on a few reasons, which we will get to later, and let us just jump right into Skippy. All right. So it is a comedy drama film based on the comic strip of the same name about a spirited young boy named Skippy living in small town America. He is the son of a doctor who is quite influential in town, and Skippy often hangs around shantytown where there is more poverty and crime, and he ends up meeting a new kid in town named Sookie, who has a dog without a license. So one day the local bully, Harley Nubbins, breaks the windshield of his father's car and blames it on the two boys, Skippy and Sookie. And Harley's father happens to be a dog catcher, and he takes Sookie's dog and asks the boys to pay for the damages as well as a license for the dog. So the film is about the boys basically going about scrapping up money in town. So the film was directed by Norman Taurog and written by Norman MacLeod and Joseph L. Mankiewicz and Don Marquis and Sam Mintz. And it stars Jackie Cooper as Skippy, Robert Coogan as Sookie, Mitzi Green, Jackie Searle, Willard Robertson, Enid Ennett, Donald Haynes, and Jack Rube Clifford. And Skippy earned 4 Oscar nominations, winning 1, but that one was not Best Picture. All right, Andrew, so you volunteered for this episode. You wanted to talk about Skippy. And it is a movie that is quite hard to find, admittedly. So tell me, first of all, why you chose to do this one and what your thoughts are on Skippy as a whole.
So I had rather fond memories of Skippy, which I haven't seen in probably about 10 to 15 years. I think I watched it with my grandparents back in the day on Turner Classic. And I remember enjoying it at the time. And when I looked through, all these old Best Picture years and the possible runners-up, this stood out as something that I'd love to check out again. And I revisited it, and I have to say, I guess my memories were a little foggy because I didn't enjoy it so much this time.
Oh dear.
I think that, Jackie Cooper was, of course, on the Our Town Little Rascals shorts back in the day, and those were always kind of a mixed bag. You had some amusing ones, some kind of dreadful and racist ones, but they were always, 15, 20 minutes in length, so it wasn't that exhausting an endeavor if it didn't work out. This is kind of like a sort of middle of the road, I would say, episode of Our Town stretched out to 85 minutes. And while I think that Jackie Cooper has a lot of charisma, is very cute. He's funny. He's like a crotchety little old man. He has, I think a lot of screen presence, but I don't know if he can carry an entire feature on his shoulders. And while I think that early on, it is amusing and he is a lot of fun to watch, I think that it ultimately gradually loses a lot of steam. And I don't think that the storyline is really compelling enough to make for a successful feature. It's a film that certainly has its moments, and I think that Cooper is a lot of fun to watch. But, looking back, I think it's more a curiosity than anything as a Best Picture nominee.
Very much so, yes. So I will say going into this, just based on the poster and the concept and what I knew about its origins as a comic strip, I expected this to be a lot more annoying than it actually is. And I think Jackie Cooper really does, for me, end up saving the film from being overtly obnoxious, because he has a surprising amount of depth as a young actor. I agree that I think the story around him isn't all that engaging. And I feel like we have become a bit cynical when it comes to movies about, animals and movies about kids, where it can kind of just be cheap and sentimental, and how these kinds of movies can just manipulate the audience without really putting in too much work to really earn that emotional investment. So I don't want to knock this too much, almost 90 years later, but I do think Jackie Cooper does a lot of heavy lifting of carrying this story, that it's hard to really recommend this past seeing his performance, and again, like you were saying, seeing how curious it is that this was a Best Picture nominee. But let's just start from the beginning, where we're introduced to Skippy and his family, and I wanted to mention actually the dolly shot that is like following up the stairs to where we first meet Skippy, which, I mean, honestly feels like it's setting up for like a horror movie, but it's just like what's lurking beyond the door. But we finally land on Skippy. He's just, hanging out in bed. But I think that those opening scenes at least do a good job of establishing his personality right off the bat, and just also showing that he knows how to manipulate people and kind of has like that street smart sensibility, like a little Jimmy Cagney kind of young boy.
Yeah, and I mean, he's constantly talking to himself.
Yeah.
As he's getting up, and he's really irresistible, especially as he's introduced, because he is just so, I would say, irresistibly crotchety. Like, again, he's just like a little diva. He's such a little ham, and he's so much fun to watch. And I love, some of the choices that he makes. Maybe the director made, where he's just like pouring cups of sugar into his oatmeal, and maybe that's why he's so like full of energy and always chatting to himself. And I think that he's very good at line deliveries. His friend asks him if he wants to grow up to be like the people in Shantytown, and he's like, "Yes, sir." And it's just like great delivery. And then as he's overlooking Shantytown, he tells his friend, "Ain't it elegant?" He's so impressed with Shantytown. And he's just like a little old pro. Like, he feels like a veteran actor who knows how to work the camera and all that stuff. And I actually do like that dolly shot up there. I think it sets it up really nicely. And I think that His acting is a lot more loose and natural and funny than the adult actors in this movie, at least his parents, who I think are kind of stiff, at
Very much
least,
so.
compared
Yeah.
to him. So, I mean, he really does, he makes such a great first impression. The question is, can he sustain that, and just, coast on that charisma for an entire 85-minute length? And I don't think it quite gets there.
Right. Yeah. I think with the parents feeling quite stiff, which I agree on, I do think that does contrast well, with kind of like how opposed they are. Like he doesn't really feel like the son of these two people. He just like feels like he's grown up in like the other side of the tracks, basically. So I guess I mean I don't know how how intentional that is, with the adults kind of not really giving much in general. But one thing I do really think was pretty well captured in the film was just the specific experience of being a kid in this kind of environment, and just all the highs and lows of childhood. You have the local bully who turns out has a father who's really brutal to him, and I think many of us have grown up with a kid that was just so full of bravado, and it turns out they also had a difficult home life. I mean, I don't know how much kids really play outside anymore, at least in the manner that we see here of just, spending all day out in the streets without the parents really checking in on them constantly. But there is an authenticity to some of those scenes, especially the whole idea of like getting into mischief and also, going through something kind of traumatic together, something kind of dark, and how that can bond you. Plus just how judgmental and mean some of the kids can be, especially when they're in a group setting. Like the whole scene towards the end of the film where they're putting on a performance and it's just so chaotic and they're getting laughed at. That's that rings true. I'll just say that.
Yeah,
I
no,
mean,
I hear you. Although that scene to me is kind of unseemly because the one black boy in this movie is basically used as kind of a prop in that
yeah.
scene, and I really it leaves me more unsettled than anything. But I do hear you, and I think that kids at the time probably got a real kick out of this film because there were so few pictures like this back in the day. I think that kids really may have gotten super involved in the whole storyline involving the dog rescue and these kids who all have very different personalities. So yeah, I definitely hear you on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know how much influence this had on other films about kids and growing up, but I did think that was perhaps one of the better elements of a film that I admittedly kind of struggle to discuss. It does sort of feel like a movie that should probably be a short or a comic strip.
Well, I think that Skippy
that
was
is
made
just
for a solid TV series or something. Obviously,
exactly
there weren't television series at this time. But I
right.
could easily see this as, a Little Rascal style television
Yeah,
series, in the 40s or the 50s more so. I think that, 20-minute episodes involving Skippy would be really, amusing and endearing. And
yeah.
as a feature, I think it's more of a stretch. I haven't a clue what the sequel to this is like. I can't imagine that it's much better. But yeah, I mean, this was a hit. People did enjoy it, and clearly it hasn't had much staying power. For
Yeah.
obvious reasons. I just don't think it's a very compelling story.
Yeah, you mentioned the sequel, which is called Sookie, and it's so wild to me that was released the very same year.
I know.
So Skippy comes out in April. It does really well at the box office, and then they just immediately greenlight a sequel that was released in December of the same year.
Was it
Like,
the same director?
yeah,
Oh,
and the two of them, and yeah, Jackie Cooper and Robert Coogan reunited. Most of the cast came back. Yeah,
and
so
is that? Do you know? I haven't seen it. Do you know if it's more so focused on Suki or is Skippy
yeah.
still the lead?
I I mean, I have no idea how anyone would even see
I
it
can't really
because,
fathom a film where Sookie is the lead. I don't really, I mean, I just don't think that Coogan really has the charisma that Cooper does at the end of the day.
no.
Yeah.
I did really want to talk about the other child performances
Yeah.
because if I'm being honest, I find them to be either just average or just straight up bad. I mean, there were a number of scenes where we had Robert Coogan just struggling through a line, and I'm just sitting there like, was that really the best take that they had? Like, how did this make the cut?
Which is
I
funny
also,
because, Norman Taurog was known for, doing a lot of takes and really like manipulating his actors. We can talk about how he
yes,
manipulated his leading man in this, but
yes,
I can't fathom that this was like the first take for Coogan.
right. I also kind of found it difficult to understand some of his lines.
Hmm.
So I wasn't really a fan of what he was giving, which is too bad because obviously the friendship, the dynamic between Skippy and Sookie is the most important relationship in the film.
Yeah.
But just his performance, just it felt very guided by the
Hmm.
director, you know. You
Hmm.
know how sometimes people say they don't like when child actors are nominated for Oscars because it's hard to tell like how much of the performance was their own acting choices versus the director really guiding them.
Hmm.
I think this is a great example of like how some child actors really do deserve the recognition, like Jackie Cooper, and he doesn't feel like he's being guided as much,
Hmm.
whereas others it's just very apparent that they are. So,
Yeah, I mean, Coogan does a lot of crying in this and a lot of whining,
mm-hmm,
but it doesn't feel altogether natural all the time.
right. What did you think of Eloise, this
I think
local
that
girl?
I think that a little of her goes a long way. I think that she's like a little mini Ethel Merman, on stage, like yelling to the back of the balcony.
Yes.
In very small doses, she does liven things up, but in her scenes, it's not really small doses, and she's giving a lot,
She is. She's going
overwhelming.
for it. Yeah.
I know some people really love Mitzi Green, though. I'm not too fond of her in this. She definitely is very unique, and
Hmm.
giving it her all, but it's just like suffocating to me.
She just feels very out of place in this environment. It's just such a random character that doesn't really have much consequence until like a scene at the end, but she has this long scene at the beginning where she's reciting a poem
Hmm.
that's called like in memory of a dead dog that
Hmm.
just goes on and on and on, and it's played for like comedic effect. I think just the way she's delivering her lines, it's very like dramatic and strange, and but there's nothing really else in the film to really match the tone of what she's giving, so it's just
Hmm.
like a very strange character in the middle of all of this.
I know. Like at any time, I picture like I wouldn't be surprised if we just like started like breaking out into like song and dance
I
because she's
know.
just like so out there. She's like this like little vaudeville star, and I mean she and the adult actors in this are just like living in two different worlds.
Yeah. So, well, one of the highlights of the film for me, I don't know if it resonated with you at all, but it's a bit of a spoiler. So this is your warning now. It also might be like a trigger warning for anyone listening who is sensitive to the treatment of animals. So even after the boys go about getting the money to get this dog a license, we have the dog catcher. He ends up getting it killed, which is quite heartbreaking. I can't say I necessarily expected it to go there, although maybe the poem that Eloise recited at the beginning should have indicated to me that it
Mm.
might go there. But the aftermath of that, where Suki is just devastated and he's sobbing, and they're walking down the street, and Skippy's trying to comfort him and, makes him laugh and gets his mind off of it. I mean, I think Jackie Cooper is very good in that scene where he's navigating so many different emotions and really trying to help his friend get through this ordeal and he's doing everything he can, but Suki is just so devastated that it's not working. But then Skippy is also quite upset about this too, and the way he's really emoting through that is very impressive considering his age. He's only 9 years old at the time, and I guess to be able to convey all those different emotions all at once and feel pretty natural is, to me, it's a gift. So what we can definitely talk about the background of that in a bit, but what did you think about the scene itself?
Well, I think that he's even better in The Champ, which I think came out the following year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
I think in that he definitely deserved an Oscar nomination. I think that here I think that he shows his range beautifully. He can be hilarious, he could be heartbreaking. I do think it's a little less convincing than some of the scenes and the sorrow of The Champ. Mm-hmm. But I agree, and especially, when he's standing there with Coogan, who I think is less natural, seems more, workmanlike in his approach. I think that, Cooper's very natural and, a very convincing crier. And, I think that he does, a really good job. Perhaps he was totally manipulated by his director. But, he really does show incredible range in this. And I think ultimately the Oscar nomination is a worthy one.
Yeah, I agree. And we can definitely talk about this now. We've certainly alluded to it. Mm-hmm. One of the more famous things about the movie is something that is rather upsetting and traumatic behind the scenes. So in his autobiography, Jackie Cooper... the autobiography is called Please Don't Shoot My Dog. Mm-hmm. And he talks about that scene where he has to cry, and I found just from an article from the LA Times where it says, when young Cooper was unable to summon tears for a big crying scene, Taurog threatened to remove the boy's small dog from the set and take it to the pound. The incident ended with Cooper believing his dog had been shot by an armed security guard. And then he goes on to say, I could visualize my dog bloody from that one awful shot. I began sobbing so hysterically that it was almost too much for the scene. Taurog had to quiet me down and by saying perhaps my dog had survived the shot, that if I hurried and calmed down a little and did the scene the way he wanted, we would go see if my dog was still alive. And only after doing the scene as best as he could did Cooper learn that his dog was unharmed. He also saw Taurog, the guard, and Cooper's grandmother grinning over their successful deception.
Yeah.
So, thoughts?
I mean, I'm not a huge Norman Taurog fan to begin with. This doesn't make me like him anymore, and I don't think it was really necessary because, as we would later see, Jackie Cooper could do dramatic work magnificently in something like The Champ. Presumably without such manipulation. So I just don't know if perhaps the director didn't have faith in his actor, which is, just unfortunate. Norman Taurog just is, to me, not, one of the all-time great directors. I think Boys Town is kind of a snooze, and he ultimately did a lot of Elvis Presley movies later on and some terrible Martin and Lewis comedies. So I don't really know that he was, the greatest of filmmakers. And again, this doesn't really make me like him anymore. That being said, this isn't necessarily uncommon. Dustin Hoffman terrorized Justin Henry on the set of Kramer vs. Kramer to get the response that he wanted. And oddly enough, I think that, there's some shades of, I'm not a huge fan of Justin Henry's performance in Kramer vs. Kramer. And I think that Coogan's crying in this kind of reminds me of Justin Henry's crying in that it does feel a little workmanlike, whereas I think that Cooper is just such a natural. So again, I feel like it was unnecessary, and it doesn't make me like the director.
I mean, for me, it's especially upsetting because Jackie Cooper is his nephew.
Yeah.
So it's like a family thing here that is just gives it an added layer of ickiness for me. That's just, I don't know.
I know that Cooper, Cooper took this personally for decades on. The fact that he, titled his memoir that, is just, a testament to how much it hurt him. And it's unfortunate and unnecessary. And
Yeah.
I don't really know why Norman Taurog won Best Director this year.
We'll get
But
into it.
yeah.
But Cooper also wrote, later people tried to rationalize to me that I had gained more than I had lost by being a child star. They talked to me about the money I made. They cited the exciting things I had done, the people I had met, the career training I had had, all that and much more. But no amount of rationalization, no excuses can make up for what a kid loses, what I lost when a normal childhood is abandoned for an early movie career.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
Unnecessary.
Yeah. Um, do we have other thoughts on Skippy?
So my favorite friend of his, well, I don't know if he's really a friend, but is
Mm-hmm.
Sydney,
Mm-hmm.
who's
Yeah.
like to me, Sydney's like out of like a Woody Allen movie. He has lines like I'm very nervous and high strung, and he's such like an adult. He looks like an adult too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that his final moment, I don't want to totally spoil it, but there's like a slapstick comedy accident toward the end involving
Mm-hmm.
Sydney that is like totally random, but I found really hilarious and kind of an interesting way to end the film. So I kind of wanted more of Sydney and less of Suki. I actually could almost watch a film around Sydney just because he's such an odd little creature.
Right. Yes. Basically, any of these kids. I mean, I'd like to see a movie about Eloise, just how she navigates this world.
Yeah,
I'm
I
just like,
could see that, but for me, it'd probably be a headache-inducing
no,
experience.
that's very true. That is a acquired taste for sure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, again, I don't think that this is a movie that has like very many grand themes that it's trying to convey.
No.
So I am pretty much done. Like I get to the end of the film and I'm like, well, sure. I'm glad that, probably people of all ages went to see this movie. It was enough of a hit to greenlight a sequel the very same year. And yeah, it's just like a nice kind of trivial entertainment that doesn't really leave a lasting impression at the end of the day.
There's
So,
a reason why it was never released on DVD.
yeah.
It's
And it's
just
not even really available on streaming right now.
I know. It is on Turner Classic, once in a blue moon, but
Right.
and that's again where I watched it back in the day, but
Mhm.
I mean, kids today would not be into this.
Probably not. Yeah. So, that's Skippy for you. And the famous peanut butter was named after Skippy, from what I
Yes. And we
understand.
should note that Norman Taurog was the youngest Best Director winner, I suppose.
That's true.
Yes.
Yes. And was that broken by Damien Chazelle?
Hmm.
I think they're
That's,
close in age.
I think that Giselle was younger, but I could
Okay.
be wrong. I think Giselle
Yeah.
broke the record.
Right. Yes. As I'm reading, he is the second youngest person ever to win the award after Damien Chazelle. So,
And did Taurog win for Boys Town too? I can't recall.
no. He was nominated,
Got it.
but I believe that was a Frank Capra win.
Got it.
Yeah. So, that's Skippy. When we come back, we will be discussing the Oscars of 1930 and 1931, where Skippy lost Best Picture to Cimarron. Normally, this is a place where I would plug in the trailer for the movie we just discussed, but couldn't find one anywhere for Skippy. But thankfully, I am very proud to announce my first sponsor of And the Runner Up is. Have you ever wanted to share a bit of the spotlight with Meryl Streep? Or play a game where Daniel Kaluuya is on your team? Sounds interesting. Well, this year you can, thanks to today's sponsor, the Star Draft. As you guys already know, award season is finally almost here, and Star Draft lets you be a part of it like never before. It's kind of like fantasy football meets the Golden Globes. Here's how it works. Head to thestardraft.com to create a league to invite friends, or join a public league to make new ones. Draft a team of 10 actors and musicians. Think Olivia Colman is going to sweep every award show this winter? Well, that certainly wouldn't be triggering for me at all, but you can draft her. Before every nomination and award show, set a lineup. Every time your actor or musician earns an accolade, they earn your team points. Then sit back, relax, watch the awards, and rehearse your acceptance speech like Kate Winslet talking into her shampoo bottle. The site's top scoring team at the end of Oscar night earns a cash prize. It's 100% free, and because I love the Star Draft and you all so much, I've created a public league that you can join right now. All you have to do is sign up and join the And the Runner-Up Is League at thestardraft.com. That's www.thestardraft.com. As always, I look forward to beating you all award season long. And we're back. So now we will be discussing why Skippy lost Best Picture to Cimarron. And Skippy was nominated for Best Picture, Best Director for Norman Taurog, Best Actor for Jackie Cooper, and Best Adaptation. And it wins Best Director for Norman Taurog. And so, again, precursors don't matter very much here, so I won't really get into that. But Cimarron goes into these Oscars with 7 nominations, which is very impressive for this early era, obviously. Why do we think that this film ends up doing so well, getting nominated in every category that it's eligible for, and winning Best Picture?
Well, I mean, it's certainly the most epic of the Best Picture nominees, although it is a curiosity that it did this well because it wasn't really that commercially successful. It actually lost the studio money.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was viewed as this, sweeping epic that spanned many years, and it starred 2 real superstars at the time. Richard Dix going into this was a superstar of the silver screen, and then Irene Dunne was a star of Broadway, of the stage. So to have these 2 stars together, drew a lot of attention. And yeah, I mean, I just think that folks viewed it as perhaps the most, important film of the bunch. And I mean, the fact that it received nominations in every single category, which I don't think was accomplished again until Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf many years later, is a testament to, how folks across the industry perhaps respected the film, even though, it wasn't a commercial success. I mean, we'll discuss the film and how it doesn't hold up, but I think at the time, people viewed it as an impressive epic, and perhaps even viewed it in some ways as oddly progressive, even though we certainly wouldn't view it that way today.
Right, especially with the rise of Irene Dunn's character towards the end of the film to becoming a senator, I think.
A congresswoman, or
Right. I mean, it seems almost unthinkable watching it now, but it was a big critical success, even though it did end up losing money. It's like the same discussion we've been having for a lot of the movies in this era, that it does have the grand sweep to it. It has a big, huge cast of characters, and it's tackling some themes, in my eyes, very unsuccessfully, but trying to say something about this particular place in American history. And yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you just look at the movies on paper that Cimarron checks a lot of boxes, even though this would be one of very few actual Westerns to win Best Picture. Right. It's, not until Dances with Wolves that another Western wins again, which is literally 60 years later.
Yeah.
But it just really feels like every single element sort of comes together, and like outstanding production, as it's called at the time. You look at Cimarron and you're like, that makes sense, at least within the context of you're a moviegoer in 1931, not now, for sure.
Right.
So in terms of contrasting that with Skippy is such a anomaly in terms of Best Picture nominees. Still, I would say, we still haven't really had a movie like Skippy that has done so well to get a Best Director win and a Best Picture nomination. But I think one reason that I went with this movie for runner-up is that the director win is pretty big, I would say, especially over Cimarron.
Oh
for
yeah, I think it's all
Wesley
but
Ruggles.
impossible to really make a case for the any of the other three. Even though, I mean, yes, Grand Hotel won without any other nominations, but even so, I think it's awfully tough to make a case for anything but Skippy here.
Yeah, because East Lynne and Trader Horn, both those are the only nominations for those two movies in Best
Yep.
Picture. And the front page, I think, is very cynical in a way that I don't know if it would reach those heights. And I do
Yeah.
think that Skippy is just one of those kind of underdog movies that the fact that it even got in is probably an indication that there was some level of passionate support just as like a cute underdog story that you could have taken your kids to, and it's like a
Yep.
solid entertainment,
Exactly.
Yeah. But I did want to mention this from Inside Oscar as I read the chapter on this, which I found to be quite interesting. I don't know if you know about this, but so at the actual ceremony, William K. Howard presented the Best Director award by reading telegrams from the four losers who had urged the Academy to give the award to Norman Taurog for Skippy.
Yeah.
And so he was a victim of a recent accident.
Mm.
And so I guess it was sort of like a sympathy thing.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Skippy does not ring of, the quintessential Best Director winner, especially like the lone Best Director winner, like kind of like a Gravity situation where
Yeah.
like, oh, it's visually so compelling that we have to give a Best Director.
Right.
I had actually heard of the accident thing before, so that's interesting because you would think that Cimarron, given its scale, would be a shoo-in for Best Director if it was winning Best Picture as well.
Right.
So that is interesting. And I know that the director Ruggles, went on to, basically pan the Academy for snubbing him for the Best Director win.
Yes, I have the quote for that as well, which is very fun. So again, I just wish that like today's directors and stars would just be this petty and open about being disappointed. He said after being snubbed of the Best Director win, I wonder where I was when the picture was made, as it was given the award for sets, production, and adaptation, which possibly I had something to do with. Okay, Shade.
Yeah. It reminds me of Billy Crystal at the '91 Oscars, who sang about how the Prince of Tides must have directed itself because
Exactly.
Streisand wasn't nominated.
Yep. So, I mean, it is very strange to me looking at that. I guess having the context of like all of the directors wanted to make sure that Norman Taurog won this makes this make more sense. But the Academy doesn't necessarily have to follow direction in that way. They
Right,
still
right.
did end up giving it to him organically. So I don't know.
I mean,
also-
I should say,
yeah, go ahead.
there are some things about Cimarron that I like. I think that I really like the opening credits. I think that they're fun with the whole cast, getting
Yeah.
introduced. And that's actually featured in the front page this year as well, kind of creatively.
Yeah.
And I do think that the opening sequence with the land rush is pretty well staged. I think that especially the opening shot really does pack a nice punch. I wish that the rest of the film had that energy behind it. And I do think the score by Max Steiner is pretty solid. I think that the production design's pretty good, highlighting the town's evolution over the years. The problem is that the film, story-wise, just kind of plods along, at a certain point, doesn't really have much momentum. And I think that Richard Dix, while he may have been a big star of the silent screen, I think that once sound came around, he kind of became more of kind of like a B-movie style actor, which is ultimately kind of what he became in the 1940s with his pictures then. So, yeah, I mean, I think you're looking at, a storyline that just isn't compelling enough and a leading man who, with sound is kind of out of his elements now, unfortunately. And which, this is from an Edna Ferber piece, and she of course also wrote Giant, which is
Yes.
one of the all-time great epics. So I mean, Giant is how you do Edna Ferber right, Cimarron is how you totally miss the mark. And she also
Exactly.
wrote, Showboat and Saratoga Trunk and other pieces too, which were adapted more successfully to the big screen. So,
Right.
I just think that this one, really, it just misses the mark. Rick Dix is just not in good form, and it is a very racist film as well.
Yeah. I do think that it is trying to be well intentioned, but it does have multiple racist elements to it, especially with the way that this young black boy, Isaiah, is characterized. And the Native Americans are just disparaged for most of the time, or just not given any content to see how they feel about all of these white people invading their land. And regardless of the intentions of Edna Ferber, to me, it is a film that just indulges in stereotypes and asks us to sympathize with the wrong people, to be quite frank. The main character of Yancey is just, a greedy colonialist who completely abandons his family for years on end, seemingly without consulting his wife, played by Irene Dunn, so that he can just keep on charting out this new land. And Robert Dix is, to me, just really not great here.
No.
He just is not suited for this part. Also, the storytelling is either too slow or too rushed. It's just like very strangely paced. It's trying to cover way too much. Even the sound mix for me is spotty, or it's just been preserved poorly, I guess.
Yeah.
But regardless, this is my least favorite Best Picture winner by a mile, and I find nothing entertaining or insightful or impactful about it. So
Interesting.
I'm good.
Yeah, for me, this is the third worst Best Picture winner. I still hate Tom Jones and actually Braveheart more than this.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, again, there are like little things I like. I do one performance I love in this is Edna Mae Oliver, who plays kind of like the town busybody. She's just like straight out of like a Carol Burnett comedy sketch.
I thought the same thing.
She is hilarious, and I think would have been a slam dunk supporting actress nominee had the category existed at this time. So she's a lot of fun.
Yeah, we keep talking about how Edna Mae Oliver probably would have just been like, I don't know, like the Thelma Ritter of this particular era if the supporting categories were there, because she always steals the show.
May have ended up winning this year, honestly.
Maybe.
I think it's possible. But yeah, I agree. The pacing is so odd because it's just like it charges out of the starting gates with that land rush sequence.
Literally,
and then just like starts to move like molasses the rest of the way. And I'll also note that I think that the aging makeup on both Dix and Dunn is pretty horrible.
Yeah, especially her at the very end when she's supposed to be like old, I think. Just I don't know what wig they put on her, but that is just atrocious.
And the film also ends on a note that I think presumes that we're super invested in these characters and are just gonna like bawl our eyes out at the outcome, and it's just not there because we don't really care about these characters, especially not him.
No. Yeah, and I didn't care for how they tried to sort of characterize him as a hero, essentially.
Oh yeah.
I have nothing else to say about Cimarron.
Yeah, it's not good, but there are certain like little things I like about it, which is more than I can say about Tom Jones, which I just refuse to touch.
Baffling.
Not that I'll be watching either of these films again.
Right. So let's just get to some questions here for both Skippy and Cimarron. All right, this is from Ronaldo Sosa. Was Jackie Cooper better in Skippy or The Champ the next year?
I would say The Champ, but I think he's very good in Skippy.
I'd say he's very good in both, and you know what? I think he deserved a nomination alongside his co-star Wallace Beery in The Champ, and I don't know, maybe I think he was even better than Wallace Beery.
I agree completely.
Yeah. This is from Mark Lamb. What would you rather watch, Skippy or an 80-minute Little Rascals compilation?
Well, they're kind of the same thing.
Right.
Depends on which Little Rascals episode you're stretching out, I guess.
Yeah, probably the compilation.
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
quite honest.
sure. Yeah.
Okay, so Steve K. Is Skippy the only movie ever to have a direct sequel released in the same year? That can't
No,
be true. Yeah,
no. The Matrix sequels,
right.
I think, came out the same year, and then I know Back to the Future 2 and 3 were very close. I don't that they weren't the same year, but it was
No,
like 6 months apart or something.
right.
And then I think, I could be wrong on this, but I think that the record for the quickest sequel turnaround is for the Chuck Norris movie Missing in Action. So
Oh,
Missing in Action 2 came out like 3 or 4 months, I think, after Missing in Action 1. And that's because Missing in Action 2, if I'm not mistaken, was actually filmed before Missing in Action 1, and they
oh.
decided to just switch them.
Hmm.
um, so that's why there was such a quick turnaround. I think that that's the record. I could be wrong though.
Yeah, fair enough. Steve K again said, "Now that you've seen every child performance nominated for an Oscar, which one is your favorite?"
So I would is Patty Duke too old to be a child performance?
I would
She's
call that a youth performance.
yeah, yeah.
Yes,
So
she's like
off the top of my
16.
head,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
would actually say my favorite child performance nominated is Patty McCormack in The Bad Seed because I think she's
Of
just
course,
so awesome in that.
you would say that.
Yes.
I love her too in that. I mean, obviously Tatum O'Neal is right up there.
Yeah.
I would say. Yeah, I'm just trying to. I mean, I even like Saoirse Ronan in Atonement. I really love her
Sure.
in that.
Yeah, I mean, I
Um,
also love, Brandon DeWild and Shane, Haley Joel
sure.
Osment, The Sixth
Yes,
Sense.
Haley Joel
Even,
Osment is a good one.
Mary Badham, To Kill a Mockingbird's great too.
Hmm. How about Jodie Foster, Taxi Driver?
Sure.
Sure. um, Even Anna Paquin. I mean, there's been many that I have enjoyed, but I would say the top of them would be actually probably Patty Duke,
Okay.
just in
Yeah.
terms of the level of commitment to that character. So,
Yeah. She's
yeah,
brilliant.
yeah. Ian Blacklock said, "Which version of Cimarron is worth watching, 1931 or 1960?"
I've actually seen the remake, and it
Uh-huh.
is slightly more tolerable. I mean, it's more tolerable because it has actors in it that we all like. It has Ann Baxter, Mercedes McCambridge, Russ Tamblyn, and there's other folks in it too. And it's also shot in really beautiful color, and so the scenery is really nice. But I think that the storytelling issues remain in it, and it's ultimately still kind of a slog.
So the
But it is
answer is
better.
neither.
Yeah, it is better
Neither is
though.
really like worth watching,
Yeah,
but
I mean,
between the
Cimarron's
two.
just yeah, it's not
Yeah.
it's not a title that's worth seeking out.
Yeah. I have not seen the 1960 version. I don't have any interest in it. So
Yeah, you can
let's
skip
move on. Jeffrey Kerr said Cimarron was the first Best Picture winner that eventually got rebooted. Then came Mutiny on the Bounty, Around the World in 80 Days, All the King's Men, Ben-Hur, Rebecca, and West Side Story coming next year. If a film won Best Picture, shouldn't it be left alone?
So when it comes to remakes, I'm always against remaking a great film, but I'm often okay with remaking a bad one because maybe you can improve upon it in some ways. Rebecca was unnecessary because you were never gonna, top Hitchcock's original. But remaking Cimarron makes sense because you can, use color, and the original one sucks. So maybe you can turn it into something worthwhile. So I'm always fine with a remake of a film that had a lot of flaws because you can kind of address those flaws and maybe make something that's great. But I'm not quite as fond of remaking something that's just kind of untouchable, which is why, as we discussed in an earlier podcast, I really am not looking forward to Spielberg's West Side Story.
Right. Yeah. Although just the benefit there is having a Latina
That's true.
lead, so there is one way of sort of improving on the original in that one specific case. Maybe
That's
not
true.
really broadly to remake the whole thing, but yeah, I mostly agree with that. I think there are ways to adapt, from a source material that the movie was made into. True Grit didn't win Best Picture or anything, but I do think that like the Coen brothers remaking True Grit from the book was a worthwhile endeavor, and it for me is definitely the preferred version between the two.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah, I think I wouldn't go so far as to say that like all Best Picture winners are now untouchable because they won Best Picture, but in most cases, I would say, why would you remake it? Like, I always kind of question the motivation behind why you would do it, unless you just truly wanted to tell a very different type of story in a different context in a modern era that is free from, all the restrictions of classic Hollywood.
Right. And that's why, A Star is Born works, because you can, kind of do it in different settings, in different
Right.
eras,
Yeah.
update it, refresh it. But then you have Rebecca, which, it just is unnecessary in every way other than, the concept of doing it in color, which proved completely unnecessary and unsuccessful.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and we mentioned, I think, a little bit on the last episode that, like, Grand Hotel is easily something that could just be adapted and has been adapted into a different type of story with different characters, just with a similar setting. So I think
Yeah.
that could be something that is okay. But otherwise, if you're just remaking it with the same story and the same story beats, then, like, what are we doing here?
Yeah. Then you have something like The Women, which was remade into
That's
the
true.
delightful Meg Ryan, Annette Bening, Deborah Messing. I mean, it's always hit or miss with these, but yeah, for me, if you're gonna remake something legendary, you better find some innovative way to refresh it. Otherwise, it's just a cash grab.
Yep, pretty much. All right. Let us jump into the other Best Picture nominees. So, again, we only have 5 nominees here, which means we only have 3 movies to talk about rather than like 8. So, here we go. Let's just jump right into East Lynne. So, I talked about how The White Parade is only available at UCLA. Well, here we have the other film that is only available in full at their film archive. Although there is a bootleg version on YouTube, except it's missing the last 12 minutes. Have you seen the As Much as Possible of East Lynne?
I've seen the cut that's on YouTube. I have not
Right.
gone to UCLA to watch the extended cut.
Yeah.
Although
Well,
I
yeah.
do know what happens in the extended cut, and
Oh.
it's amazing.
Okay. Well, I did decide to go ahead and just watch this version, and it's solid. It's a big romantic melodrama that to me almost reads like a parody all these years later of like Oscar bait movies where there's a woman who's marrying a rich man and has to deal with her new life, and then he accuses her of cheating on her, so then she leaves and she almost goes blind at one point. There's a backdrop of war and she returns to her family towards the end. And it's actually really funny because the bootleg version I watched, on YouTube actually cuts off at a big climactic moment
Yep.
where she's about to reunite with her son, who she hasn't seen in like 10 years. And then right at that moment, it just cuts off. I felt like I was watching the finale of The Sopranos or something. So, I don't really know how to assess the film considering I don't know the ending, but I guess I wouldn't really call it like an essential watch for me.
No, I mean, it's a tough film to really judge because you're just watching, a partial film essentially.
Right. A
But
beginning and a middle.
yeah, for what it is, I think it's okay. I think Anne Harding's actually really terrific here, and I think
Yeah.
would have been a worthy Best Actress nominee. And speaking of Rebecca, the way this film opens, I think, is very akin to Rebecca, where she's, entering this grand estate, and she's met by this woman, her husband's sister, played by Cecilia Loftus, who's kind of a Judith Anderson type. She's just kind of this like scheming scene stealer, and you think this could actually be something really compelling, and then it really doesn't turn into anything that diverting. I think the men in the film are kind of thinly drawn, not very compelling. And, I mean, I think it's performed with, a lot of enthusiasm all around. And I think it's really lavishly designed. I think had there been a costume design category, this would have been a
Yeah.
shoo-in for a nom there. And I think it's nicely shot. But, in terms of story, it's just kind of a run-of-the-mill soap opera, to
Right.
me. That's just, very, nicely staged and features, a very solid leading turn from Anne Harding. My understanding is that the book was actually a lot more salacious than the movie, even though we're in a pre-code era here. So it was toned down a bit. So I'd be intrigued to see, what's in the book. But I do know what the ending is. I don't know if it'd be considered a spoiler to discuss what happens in the final cut. Do you want me to go into what happens?
If you want, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I mean, this is insane, but so the final 12 minutes, Anne Harding is indeed reunited with her child, and during the visit, she is ultimately struck completely blind, and she
Oh,
ultimately leaves the estate, and being blind, finds herself wandering off into nowhere, and ultimately falls off a cliff to her death.
oh my God.
So that's how Eastland ends in the final cut. So you have to wonder if
Wow.
maybe the 12 minutes were purposely cut so we just wouldn't be able to see that. It's
This
just,
sounds amazing.
I know, it really does.
Yeah.
So if I'm ever at UCLA, perhaps I'll just,
Yeah.
check that out, fast forward to the final 12 minutes just because I don't want to rewatch this whole thing again and
Right.
just see how the
Wow.
hell they actually staged that because it does sound fantastic.
Now I'm even more intrigued by this ending now that I know what it is. Wow.
I know, I
Okay.
know. But yeah,
Yeah.
Anne Harding's awesome.
She
The
is.
film itself, it's okay.
Yeah, and Anne Harding is actually nominated this year for Holiday.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, probably would have been a good nominee here. Mark Lamb said, "Is East Lynne the most difficult to see Best Picture nominee? I know a copy exists in the UCLA collection. That field trip sounds like a good idea for 2021." Yeah, totally. Let's all just go to UCLA, watch East Lynne, watch the White Parade, um, make it a double feature.
Yeah,
And no, it is not the most difficult to see because The Patriot is just completely unavailable to see. So,
yeah.
all
Got to see
right.
that ending somehow.
I know, I know. All right. Let's move on to the front page.
Yep.
So, I'm a fan of this one.
As am I.
Um, Good, okay. I don't consider it to be like a fantastic film, but I have the least objections to it from this Best Picture lineup, so by default, I guess it's my winner. I think a lot of people are more familiar with the adaptations of this story than maybe this original one. It was adapted into the 1974 remake with Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, of course,
Hmm.
as well as His Girl Friday,
Yeah.
and also a film called Switching Channels from the 80s.
Yes, yes.
Yes. So it's all about a reporter who ends up hiding this escaped murderer at the newsroom. Hijinks ensue. People know the story, basically. I actually still haven't seen the 1974 version, even though a lot of people recommend it. But having seen His Girl Friday, I would say I probably prefer that. But this is still a solid film considering the time period. It really gets to the atmosphere and the sort of dynamics of a newsroom where people are just busting each other's balls. It doesn't really paint journalism in a particularly strong light, but it seems very well researched, I guess.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Pat O'Brien and Adolphe Menjou aren't exactly Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell, but few people can be. So,
No, no. Yeah, I like the front page as an overall property. I think His Girl
you're
Friday
right.
is fabulous. And I think it is superior to this just because, I mean, Roz Russell is just so
Hmm.
iconic and certainly more so than these two. Although I do really like Adolphe Menjou and Pat O'Brien. I love the scene of them at the bar early on. It reminds me of the scene in Network with William Holden and Peter Finch at the bar
Hmm.
early on in that film. I think that these two actors just have a wonderful rapport, lots of chemistry, and I can only imagine what audiences at the time who were used to the silence thought of this like wildly fast-paced in terms of dialogue film.
Yeah, very
just because
talky.
it's nonstop dialogue.
Yeah.
And yeah, it has a ton of energy. And I think that the director, Milestone, does a pretty good job of keeping it from feeling totally stage-bound. I mean, there is a certain staginess to it, but the camera is constantly moving. He gets it outside a bit, so it doesn't feel that claustrophobic. I think it's a terrific ensemble showcase all around, although I do think that the female roles in this are kind of thinly drawn.
Yeah.
There's a cleaning lady named Jenny in it who I think is hilarious, and I wish there was more of her. She's just kind of a tiny role. But yeah, I really enjoy it. I enjoy the front page, the 70s version with Mathau and Lemon. I also enjoy switching channels with Burt Reynolds and Kathleen Turner in these roles. They're a lot of fun, even though they apparently hated each other behind the scenes. And I actually saw the front page when it was revived on Broadway a few years back with Nathan Lane and John Slattery, who were also fabulous. So this is just, I think a very reliable piece. And I think the writing is pretty strong. I think it's nicely paced. I think it's pretty well photographed. And I adore the ending with Adolf Menjou. Well, I don't want to spoil it, but I think it ends on a really funny and clever note that is just right for this.
Agreed. Yeah. Yep. Kevin Clowder asks us, how do you rate the front page compared to His Girl Friday? Like I said, I think His Girl Friday is probably superior in just bringing the material to life in a way that's almost just like manic, which sort of works for this material. But again, worth seeing this for I think the dynamic, I sort of agree that Menjou and O'Brien are strong together, and it's interesting to just see a movie like this from the very early 30s, comparing it to, like you said, like we're just coming out of the silent era, and to see how they stage this film that is so incredibly reliant on the writing and just having to sell this mile-a-minute dialogue, I think is worth checking out regardless.
Yeah, again, I think that Roz just sends His Girl Friday so over the top and makes it just such a sparkling film. I think this one's probably about on par with the 70s remake with Lemon and Mathau, and I think this one's ultimately better than Switching Channels, although I do think Switching Channels, which nobody talks about now, is actually worth checking out because, while they didn't get along, I think Burt Reynolds and Kathleen Turner are a surprisingly pretty good team in that. So yeah, it's too bad that one's not too available, but I really like all of these front page movies, and I don't know what it is about these male ensembles, but you have Lewis Milestone, the director, and you have Charles Lederer, the screenwriter, who would go on to later collaborate on Ocean's 11 many years later, which is also one of the most iconic male ensembles. So yeah, this is a great team, a lot of talent both behind and in front of the camera here. And I think it's easily the best of the Best Picture nominees here.
Agreed. Yes. This is from Mark Lamb. The front page has been remade as much as A Star is Born, His Girl Friday, the 1970s version, Switching Channels. What makes this property so filmable? I think it's just the source material.
Yeah, I think people also, there's just something about a fast-paced newspaper comedy that's just kind of timeless.
Yeah.
Good ensemble showcase.
Yeah. It's just very energetic, I think, and fun to watch. There's lots of fun twists and turns, obviously, with all the hijinks with, hiding the murderer and everything. So, yeah, it is just kind of strangely enduring through the decades.
Yeah.
Joe Gouveia said, who's really the lead of the front page, Menjou or Pat O'Brien? I think this is alluding to the fact that Menjou is nominated for Best Actor and Pat O'Brien is not.
Well, I think that the O'Brien role is really the true lead here, but Menjou's, the scene-stealing one, and usually the actor who plays Walter Burns gets whatever the nomination is. Like when this was on Broadway, Nathan Lane got the nomination, but it was actually in featured actor for what it's worth. But yeah, Walter Burns is one of those characters who the screen time isn't necessarily there, but you're always thinking of him. He always feels like he's there.
Yeah.
just because he commands such a presence. But yeah, the Hildy is certainly, the true lead of this.
Yeah. And obviously, it's always important to remember we did not have supporting
Yes.
categories at the time. So it's not like, there's much discussion about category fraud either way. Like, they
Right.
only had one option to put Adolf Menjou into one category. So,
Yeah, he's actually not even like the most category fraud of the Best Actor lineup this year. Which is
I know.
Frederick March, who's really a supporting actor in his film. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a role that's kind of on the fence between lead and supporting.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, we'll get to it later, but I do think Lionel Barrymore isn't necessarily the lead of A Free Soul. Um,
That's true. Yeah.
Debatable. All right. Let's move on to our final nominee, and that is Trader Horn.
Ooh, okay.
So, strap in, folks. So,
Uh,
I have to say, I watched Cimarron on Monday. I did not have a good time watching that. And then my next film the following day was Trader Horn.
I'm so
And
sorry.
what a double feature this was, I must say. One of those times where I'm just like, what am I doing with my life? Why am I putting myself through this? Just these dreadful racist films. And it's even more depressing knowing that the Academy of the time felt that these were really like the cream of the crop best pictures of the year. So, Trader Horn is a film that I really had to search for, and the juice was not worth the squeeze. Um, this is quite honestly probably the worst film nominated for Best Picture, and I do not say that lightly.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm inclined to agree.
Yeah, because like Cimarron has these racist undertones, but it still kind of seems well intentioned.
Mm.
This is just like overt racism, overt colonialism. It's about a white man and his mentor, and they go to Africa on a safari, and eventually they find this white woman whose mother was killed by the natives, and basically they try to rescue her from the natives because, and I quote, "Don't you understand? White people must help each other." So, once again, just like Cimarron, the natives are just given little to no personality. There are numerous scenes of animals being killed, and you see this openly, like it's not even shied away from. And this is also one of the first real like travel log films. It was the first non-documentary Hollywood movie that would film in Africa. So I guess I understand why an academy would find this to be kind of like innovative, but there is absolutely no reason to seek this out unless you are an Oscar completist, really.
Yeah, it's an abomination, and I mean it ruined people's lives. It ruins Nina
Yeah,
Booth's career.
that too.
She was infected with malaria during the filming, and she rightfully sued MGM years later, but she never got her career back. And the production was a disaster. Capturing the sound was all but impossible, so they had to just constantly redo it. It's dreadful all around, not worth the misery that it caused. It's another one of these films where, your white lead supposedly knows more about Africa than the actual Africans do. I mean, Harry Carey's, he's a great supporting actor. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Duel in the Sun, Red River. He's been great before. He has nothing to chew on here. The film is banking on, its grand landscape, but it isn't very well photographed. It's haphazardly edited. The pace is slow. It sucks. And it also lost money. So it wasn't even a commercial success.
Yeah.
The one, good thing I might say is that I do think Edwina Booth, she does breathe some life into it. It's a very outlandish and energetic turn. And I must say, it kind of reminds me of a certain actress that we've spoken about previously on this show. She kind of reminds me of Sally Kirkland in this. I think that
Oh,
Sally
okay.
Kirkland would have done quite well in a role like this. She has
Interesting.
that kind of madcap, eccentric, oddball energy that Sally Kirkland has, very flamboyant.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, the role sucks. So,
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
only can do so much. And this ruined her life. So, yeah, it's bad. And it's from a director that, I often like, W.S. Van Dyke, who directed most of the Thin Man movies, and I enjoy most of those. But this is just dreadful.
Yeah. Um, it's again, and it's also like 2 hours. I mean, obviously, 2 hours doesn't sound like a lot compared to movies we get now, but just like considering the content of the film, it is just like a dreary and upsetting experience for
Yeah.
pretty much all of it.
Truly
Yeah.
upsetting, and it was one of the highest grossing films of the year, but the production was just so chaotic and out of control that
Yeah.
it still lost its money. I mean, just a disaster all around, and incredible that it received a Best Picture nomination when the production was just so inept.
Yeah. It's like Dr. Doolittle.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Uh,
I don't know if there was really much like a formal campaign for these movies at the time, but there must have been some insider
yeah,
nonsense that got this the nomination.
probably. Yeah. What is this? MGM? Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, but like just reading about what happened behind the scenes with like many of the animal scenes were filmed in Mexico by a second unit to avoid
Mhm.
the American laws on the ethical treatment of animals.
Yeah.
For example, lions were reportedly starved to promote vicious attacks on hyenas, monkeys, and deer. It's just everything I read about it is just makes me even more upset about its place here. I wish this was just forgotten to history,
Yeah.
to be quite honest.
It is forgotten. Yeah. I mean, it's a completely
I mean,
forgotten
it
film.
is, but
Yeah.
just like more forgotten than being a Best Picture nominee. um, so,
It did, however, spawn a sexploitation film in the 70s called Trainer Horny, just so you know.
yes, that is true.
Probably more watchable than this one.
Yeah. And apparently, also, there was a documentary in 2009 called
Really?
Trader Horn The Journey Back, featuring Harry Carey Jr.
Ah, nice.
Yeah, not
Won't be
interested.
checking that out.
No. Okay, let's get to these questions. We didn't get anything specifically for Trader Horn, but let's just say it's implied.
Yeah.
Jackson DeStefano said, how many of these films would you say are good of the
Again, I
five?
really like the front page. And Eastland's okay. It's not a movie that I'm ever going to knock, but it's also
Mm-hmm.
not something I'm ever going to revisit, I don't think. The rest,
Yeah. Yeah, I would say the front page, end of list.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Gabe Guarin said, is this one of the worst years for Best Picture? Also, Ronaldo Sosa said, does this dethrone 1963 as the worst Best Picture lineup for you?
It probably does. Just because, I hate Tom Jones. I hate it so much.
Yeah.
But, I
Flames
mean,
on the
how the
side of
rest
your
was
face.
won is fine. Lilies of the Field is a perfectly pleasant film. Was America America that year?
Yep. Yep.
That's a pretty good movie. And then
Yeah.
Cleopatra is, a hot mess, but I'd much rather watch that than, like, Cimarron.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the front page aside, this lineup is terrible.
Yes. Congrats to 1963. You're no longer the worst in my eyes. Now, having seen all of these movies, I can very confidently say this was a dreadful year at the Oscars, at least in terms of Best Picture. I mean, the acting categories are pretty solid, I would say, but
Mm.
it's just brutal. There's outside of the front page, I agree. There's just nothing there that holds
Yeah.
up.
And what's sad is this
So,
wasn't like a terrible year for films overall. There's some great movies this year, but
we'll get to it. Yeah.
man, yeah. Oof.
Also, which something that kind of matches that is, I was reading also from Inside Oscar that the ceremony itself was really panned, and
Mm.
Daily Variety said that the whole affair was a long-winded, verbose, political, and dull evening of a nature which will repel many a Hollywoodian next year.
Okay. Well, I
unless
know that
memories
Jackie
dim and
Cooper.
time makes them forget. So,
I know that
yep,
Jackie Cooper slept through the entire ceremony, so
which is
perhaps
a
for good
mood.
reason.
Yes, mood.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So that's that. That's our fabulous Best Picture lineup of this year.
hmm
Um, any other thoughts on anything there before we move on to should have been a contender?
No, no. I mean, I think that the front page, if I had to do my own Best Picture lineup, the front page would be the only one that advances to that, for sure.
Agreed. Yeah. All right, well, maybe we'll talk about some that actually deserve to be nominated here as we get
Yeah.
to our should have been a contender segment. And this is really a prime example of why I include this segment in
Mm.
episodes so that we can actually talk about how, despite what the Academy said, this year was actually maybe a good year in film. So, Andrew, what do you got for me?
So, I mean, I know that the time spans with eligibility were, kind of specific. So if I'm off on any of these, just let me know and we can skip
I
it.
will I will
Um,
pull up the document.
so I think that the two best films of this year are Chaplin's City Lights and then Todd Browning's Dracula. I think
Hmm.
that City
Both are
Lights.
eligible. So,
Okay.
you're in the clear.
Great. I mean, City Lights is just magnificent. It really is. I mean, it has one of the all-time great endings. I mean, top 10, maybe even top 5. It's just so beautiful. I think it's Chaplin's finest film. I mean, he does such a brilliant job, both in front of and behind the camera. I mean, it has such a wonderful reputation and it lives up to it. I revisited just the final scene a few days ago
Mhm.
in advance of this, and it's still really just it tugs at the heartstrings in a way that doesn't feel at all manipulative and feels fully earned. I think it's just sublime. And
Yeah.
then Dracula is also exquisite. I think it's masterfully photographed. The cinematography is gorgeous. And then Bela Lugosi is just, iconic as can be. And I think would have been worthy of a Best Actor nomination. Not that he ever would have received one, but I mean, so iconic and sexy and hypnotic and scary. I think it's still a very unsettling film,
Hmm.
more so than Frankenstein, which I think came out the following year in terms of eligibility.
Right.
Um, yeah, I think it's masterful and really shows the universal monster genre right at the top of its game. So they really charged out of the starting gates with a beautiful film here. So those would be my first two. If you, I don't know if
Yeah.
you want to touch on either of those
Yeah.
before I
Yeah.
proceed.
I definitely co-sign both. Obviously, City Lights has really endured. I agree that the ending is just exquisite on so many levels. It combines the great broad comedy that he's known for, especially with all the sound effects and the music that was all inserted after the filming. But just also that beautiful poignancy where the two of them are really connecting at the end, and the look on his face is so priceless.
hmm
Um, it's unfortunate that the sound era had really made silent films like this really out of favor. And it was something of a risk for him to even make another silent film at the time. But, it was a big critic hit and people loved it, but it just wasn't the kind of film that the Academy would really go for anymore. Even if it's, we're talking about the fourth Academy Award, so it's not like it had a long history at this point, but it just wasn't in favor anymore, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate that they passed up a real masterpiece. But then with Dracula, I agree. I mean, I don't really think that the ending is great for
Mm.
Dracula. It's a bit anticlimactic in my eyes,
Yeah.
but Bela Lugosi is the definitive Dracula. Hard to deny that. And I love the use of lighting and cinematography to really just convey that dread at the beginning and the horror of it all. And just the production design is off the charts.
Mm.
But yeah, I just love the style and the moodiness. I mean, production design, for one, would be a clear nomination
Mm.
deserved for this movie. But yeah, Bela Lugosi too. So let's talk about actually these two acting winners, if we can. I don't know how we
Yeah.
feel about the films themselves
Mm.
necessarily, but I want to get into Min and Bill
Okay.
for Marie Dressler here.
Yes.
So she wins Best Actress for this film that is a little over an hour. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I have to admit that I actually wanted more from the story, or at least I
Agreed.
think if it were stretched out to 90 minutes, there would have been more room to breathe and find more, nuance in the relationships. But it's a really interesting concept where she's playing a woman named Min, who is just like a salt of the earth woman who runs an inn, and she's raising this young woman who she took in when she was younger. And Min also, she has this kind of love-hate relationship with Bill, played by Walter Beery. I don't know if the relationship is really important enough to justify that being the title, where it's really more about Min and all the sort of tough choices she's having to make for this young woman that she's raising. But I think Marie Dressler has such a unique and almost imposing kind of screen presence that she occupies a very specific space in this era. And I love that she was a full-blown movie star at this point because of this film, that MGM was able to stay in the black because of how popular this movie was and how popular she was.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
She was the #1 box office star of that time. And 4 years,
Leading lady
a few
star.
years earlier, she couldn't get a job anywhere. You know, she was a former vaudeville star. And then she was in Anna Christie in, I think, 1930. That was kind of her big breakout. And then the nation just like fell in love with her. And I'm in love with her. I love Marie Dressler. I think, you know, it's funny. I never consider this among my favorite Best Actress winners, but now that I think about it, it's really up there for me. I think she's fabulous. I think the film it is too short. Things aren't fleshed out as much as they should be. I wish that this were at least stretched out to at least an hour and a half. But I think she's wonderful here. It kind of reminds me of, you know, my favorite Best Actress winner, Shirley Booth and Come Back Little Sheba. I think they have kind of similar screen presences. And she's just magnificent here. I love this Best Actress win. I think I'm so happy that she won for this.
Yeah, I know. And again, I just love that she was like a defining movie star of this very specific short amount of time, sadly short because she died of cancer a few years after this.
Yeah.
But, you know, this is like a character actress who is now like a leading lady star who people loved. I just wish she could
She would have
kind of
gone on to go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just wish that she had the longevity to really make a lasting impact into the 30s and maybe the 40s.
I know she would have gotten so many Oscar nominations, perhaps more so in supporting down the line, but she would have been a go-to, much like I think Thelma Ritter was later on. You know, such an idiosyncratic, but just such a wonderful presence, and I love this win. I really do.
Yeah. And she doesn't have like the conventional attractiveness of a lot of actresses at the time, but there's just seems like there's so much love for her. And that's just from everything I've read about her place in Hollywood at this time. People just adored her. And we talked about this a little bit, I think, with Zach on the last episode. But like, I can really feel a similarity here with like Frances McDormand and how well she is kind of received in Hollywood and how respected she is. And is commanding these movies that you can't picture anyone else commanding, but she just does it in her own unique way, and that's really what Marie Dressler was, I think, at this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think people they saw themselves in Marie Dressler. You know, she felt very real, unlike the other screen stars of the time. So, yeah, she's wonderful, and I wish she were around for longer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another big part of it is that, you know, we were in the middle of the Great Depression, so I think there was definitely a hunger for actresses like her. Glenda Miss Jackson, if you're nasty, asks us, do you prefer Marie Dressler in Min and Bill or Emma, which she was nominated for the following year?
So, Kyle, I think that Emma might be the better movie. That's actually a close call. I think, you know, both films are okay, but elevated so much because of her. I think that
Hmm.
Emma might be a slightly better movie, a more fleshed out film than Min and Bill, but I really like watching both of them, so it's a close call.
I did not actually watch Emma, but I
Mm.
am very intrigued to see more of Marie Dressler. She's one of these actresses who I can't say that I really had known much about before I started this, but that I'm very like intrigued by and feel like I kind of stumbled upon someone who I want to see more from. So I
Mhm.
will eventually be checking that out. Um, yeah. So A Free Soul is
Mm.
Lionel Barrymore winning Best Actor. It's also a directing nominee that did not translate to Best Picture.
Mm.
Also, Norma Shearer was nominated. So, again, I mean, I don't really know why this isn't a Best Picture nominee.
Right, right.
But, yeah, this movie, as well as Cimarron, I believe, were the first movies in Oscar history to receive multiple acting nominations. So that's interesting.
Mhm.
I think this movie is also famous for being one of the earliest examples of the Oscar scene, quote unquote,
Yeah. Right,
where
right.
Lionel Barrymore is in the courtroom and has this 12-minute uninterrupted take where he defends his daughter and the situation that she's been put in, and then just collapses. You just like
Mm.
picture a round of applause from the audience after all that. What do you think of this one?
Yeah, I think it's okay. I think that Barrymore's solid, and I'm not a huge fan of Clarence Brown. Brown is very hit or miss with me. I do like
Yeah.
some films, and other ones are just total snooze fests. This kind of
Mm-hmm.
falls, somewhere in the middle for me. I think that the cast is in fine form, although it's perhaps not their finest hours. Definitely feels very influential on future courtroom dramas. Um, and I do think Barrymore's pretty impressive in that scene. I know that there's some debate over whether he's, more a lead or supporting. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, obviously there's no supporting category, but I think he's more so. I think he's a justified lead for this. I think that Clark Gable's in pretty good form. Definitely an early turn from him. Um, Not a film that I'm ever really inclined to revisit. I think it's a little dry, but it's not bad, and it is very surprising that it wasn't a Best Picture nominee, and it certainly
Mm-hmm.
would have been more deserving than four of them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a standard sort of love triangle type of deal where we have Norma Shearer, Leslie Howard, and Clark Gable in one of his first real breakout roles, basically playing the guy that everyone warned you about. Um,
Hmm.
he is just so thoroughly unlikable in this that it's almost uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Where we actually see him like beating up on Norma Shearer and so many characters really. Um,
Hmm.
I don't always love Norma Shearer, but I think she's good here.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe because this is a role that sort of allows her to be more fully fleshed out as a human being. I think she just feels more open here, which I like. Still kind of ends up being about just like daddy issues by the end, but
Mm.
it's a good film, just if only for the performances, I would say, are worth
Yeah.
checking out.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. Catherine Short has an interesting question for us, a provocative one. Do you think that Norma Shearer and Lionel Barrymore have an incestuous relationship in A Free Soul?
Wow. I haven't watched A Free Soul in quite a while, but it wouldn't surprise me if there were hints of that.
They have a strong connection. That is sort of the heart of the film, is that relationship. So I get where that's sort of coming from.
Mm.
I don't think that that is actually the case, but interesting question. So do you have any other films you want to talk about here?
Um, so The Royal Family of Broadway is a lot of fun. George Cukor, actually, it's written by, I don't know if she wrote the adaptation, but it's an Edna Ferber adaptation of the play The Royal Family, which is quite often revived on Broadway and in local theater. Like the front page, it's pretty fast paced. It's a fun comedy. It's basically a parody of the Barrymore family at this time. And Frederick March is doing a really hilarious parody of John Barrymore. It's a really fun ensemble showcase, much like the front page. I wish it were more easily accessible. It was actually written by, of all people, Herman Mankiewicz, I think. I think he actually did the adaptation. Yeah. It's a little stagey, but this is much like something like Noises Off. It's just like a really fun comic showcase for its actors, and they're all in terrific form. Beyond that, what did I write down? Let's see. There's actually another Q-Core film from this year called Tarnished Lady. So it's a pretty early effort from him, and he is collaborating with Tallulah Bankhead on this. So it's a pretty early endeavor from both of them. Kind of a run-of-the-mill soap opera, but it's at least worth checking out for films for fans of this era who want to see a terrific legendary director working with a legendary actress. Together they at least make this a pretty watchable film. And then there is one more, Just Imagine, which is a completely forgotten film, but it's a musical comedy, and it's set in the future being 1980 in New York. And it's a future in which cars have been replaced by airplanes, and all the food has been replaced by pills, and it's just this bizarre vision for the future. And it's a musical comedy, and it stars Maureen O'Sullivan, and it's just an all-around bizarre endeavor. But the production design is so much fun. The visual effects are kind of nifty. Haven't seen it in a while. I don't know how accessible it would be, but that's a lot of fun. I think that's it on my end. There's some other titles that I suspect you might mention that are pretty notable from this year.
Yeah, I'm just looking at Just Imagine, which is nominated for its art direction.
Okay.
It's I read that it's also notable as the first film of the science fiction genre to be nominated for an Oscar. That's fun.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's really a good film, but it's just so bizarre that if it's ever on TCM, it's worth checking out.
I mean, I'm just looking at the character names.
Right, they're all like numbers.
They're wild. The main character is single O, and then LN18 and J21 and D6.
Right.
I'm intrigued, not gonna lie.
It has crazy, Busby Berkeley dance numbers, and it's wild.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I want to talk about Morocco. We just talked about Joseph von Sternberg with Shanghai Express. This is the movie that got Marlene Dietrich her one and only Oscar nomination. It was also nominated for Best Director and Art Direction and Cinematography, and yet couldn't find a room for a Best Picture nom. I think I like this movie more for its style than its substance. We went into a whole thing about that with Shanghai Express last time, but I mean, at the beginning of the film, we have Marlene Dietrich dressed up in a tuxedo and a top hat, performing and flirting with a woman in the audience and kissing her and just totally owning her sexuality. Makes a big first impression, but basically it becomes a big love story with love triangle, I guess, with Gary Cooper and Adolphe Menjou. I love the atmosphere of this. It's very heightened and almost dreamlike. And as Zach was mentioning, the German Expressionism influence that we talked about with Shanghai Express, you can really feel that here with a big emphasis on facial gestures and very simple expressions and reactions. And I think the ending is very modern feeling, where it doesn't really spell things out, but really just leaves it up to the viewer to sort of interpret what might come next. So yeah, I'm a fan.
Yeah, I mean, Marlena's, she's so sexy in this and so charismatic. She's beautifully lit. I mean, no director
as always, yes,
has loved his leading lady more than this. And honestly, I'd probably vote for von Sternberg in Best Director for the win. I think he does a really nice job here. Um, yeah, I mean
I
it's
agree.
terrific. I think Menju is a good form here. It's certainly a different turn than his performance in the front page. And Gary Cooper, I'm always kind of lukewarm on.
Yeah.
I think he's okay here, kind of out of place. I think that Marlena and Adolf, seem to inhabit more of the same world. But yeah, it's very good, and I mean, it was a big hit. It kind of saved Paramount, which was in kind of flailing shape um, at this point. So Marlena definitely helped him on the commercial end, and I think it certainly would have been a worthy Best Picture nominee.
Yep. Totally. And Cat L said, which film could Morocco have bumped off for Best Picture? I mean, again, I would prefer it to be any of them outside of the front page. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know what was probably fifth in this race. I guess East Lynne, maybe, or Trader Horn.
Yeah,
Hard to say.
my sense is East Lynne was directed by Frank Lloyd, who was one of the
Yes,
founders of the Academy. I think
true.
maybe he kind of pushed it in there, which may not have been the case with Trader Horn. So I think
Hmm.
maybe Trader Horn was fifth. Um,
Yeah.
that being said, I feel like A Free Soul might be the sixth nominee and not
Hmm.
Morocco, but
Yeah.
just based on the Best Actor win,
Yeah.
that
And
certainly would have been
yeah.
deserving.
Yeah. So did you have any others? I have one more, but
The only other two that I think are really worth mentioning would be the two gangster movies of this year. So Little Caesar and The Public
Mhm.
Enemy, which I think were both in this eligibility period.
Yep, they were both
Um,
nominated actually for writing. Yeah.
oh, excellent. Okay. So, Little Caesars, Mervyn LeRoy, Public Enemy, William Wellman. So you have, these pretty high profile directors. And they're both, very solid films. Little Caesar has Edward G. Robinson, Douglas Fairbanks. The Public Enemy, of course, has James Cagney. And, these films were box office hits, but there was, kind of a perception at the time that these films were glorifying the lives of these gangsters, were glorifying the violence. And even Cagney himself at the time kind of joined into that sentiment. So that perhaps kind of dragged them down a bit from reaching like best picture heights. But they're
Hmm.
certainly, remembered films, they're accessible films, very rewatchable films. I wouldn't say this is really like my cup of tea genre. These aren't films that I would find myself revisiting, but they're both, very solid and a testament to the versatility of these directors because, Mervyn LeRoy would go on to do a lot of like Greer Garson soap operas, and he would like direct Gypsy and The Bad Seed. So like a wide variety of films. Then Wellman, of course, directed Wings earlier, and then would do A Star Is Born. So I mean, these are two very talented, versatile directors, and they're really right at the tops of their game with these two films. Even if I don't personally love this genre
Mm.
myself.
Yeah. It's funny. I was also reading about that wave of concern that gangster movies were really glorifying this lifestyle and the violence.
Mm.
And it just goes to show you that things really haven't changed since really
Yeah.
the beginning of cinema. People have been voicing their concerns about like how influential movies can be and whether they are directly leading to the violence and sort of terror that's happening in the real world. So
Yeah.
it's an age old thing. The other movie that I wanted to talk about is Taboo.
Mm.
So, on the flip side of what we've talked about with Best Picture, we have a film here that actually manages to respect non white characters and performers. And this is such a unique film, at least in the context of Oscar history. It wins Best Cinematography. By the way, the cinematographer is Floyd Crosby, the father of David Crosby.
Oh.
Yeah. And this is actually a silent film that was set in French Polynesia on the island of Bora Bora. And almost all of the cast is native to the land. And it's basically a tragic love story. And what's so remarkable about it for me is just how economical it is with the storytelling, how much it is just a slice of life that feels almost like a documentary, that just also honors the traditions of this culture without feeling exploitative. And it's really showing the film from their perspective, which then makes this eventual arrival of Western civilization to be negative. And the film is split into two parts, Paradise and Paradise Lost. And in that second part, we really see how much their lives have been ruined, basically, because their paradise has been interrupted. And it's just a tragic story on many levels, but also very effective and very unlike any other film that I watched for this particular episode. And I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but, I'm glad Cimarron lost at least.
I know, especially to a film that actually, again, respects its non-white characters. Right. So that is what I wanted to end on. I can't say that it was a fun experience watching a lot of these movies, but there's something very unifying in just how kind of out of time and uncomfortable a lot of these films are to watch from a modern perspective, that I will certainly remember this particular Oscar year, but maybe not for the better.
Yeah, I'm just honored to be a part of an episode on the worst Best Picture lineup of all time.
Yes,
that's pretty awesome.
Congrats. We actually just got a few other questions that I failed to integrate into the rest of this, but just from Catherine Short, on a scale of 1 to 10, how hot was early 1930s Frederick March? Pretty hot, not gonna lie.
He's a good-looking man. I love Frederick March. I think he's fantastic in Jekyll and Hyde the year after.
Yes.
But he's a wonderful actor.
He's great. He's charismatic, and I would give him like an 8. He's not like right up there, but still, you can see why he got a lot of work. Let's just say that.
10 out of 10.
Wow, there you go. And then just one more from Catherine Short. I don't know. Have you seen this version of Holiday with Anne Harding?
I've seen the Katharine Hepburn one. I haven't seen the Anne Harding one. I don't know if it's accessible now, but back when I tried to watch Holiday, it was all but impossible to find.
Okay. Well, this other question was about comparing the two of them, but let's just skip that.
I do like the Hepburn one, yeah.
Yeah, I do too. Plus it has my boyfriend, Cary Grant. Yes. Okay, so that's that. When we come back, we will be delivering our verdict, oh boy, as to whether we think Cimarron deserved Best Picture or if Skippy should have taken it.
It was called the Oklahoma Land Rush.
We're going out to a brand new two-fisted rip-snorting country full of Indians, rattlesnakes, gun-toters, and desperados.
And a pioneer family helped turn a wild frontier into a proud state.
Did you have to kill him like that?
No, I could have let him kill me.
Richard Dix and Irene Dunn star in the only Western to ever win Best Picture, Cimarron.
And we're back. So now we'll be delivering our verdict as to whether we think Cimarron deserved Best Picture or if it should have been Skippy. Andrew Carden, what's your verdict?
Neither. The front
You choose
page.
option C.
City Lights.
You're going third party here.
Yeah, right in.
I abstain.
Yeah.
But I guess of the two, congrats, Skippy.
Yeah,
I have less problems with Skippy, so sure, why not? It would certainly be a very unique winner, so love when that happens. Yeah. But I agree that it's
Skippy of the category of the front page of the year, City Lights.
Wow. So I guess we just completely line up. That's boring.
Great minds.
Yeah, truly. All right. Well, Thank you so much, Andrew, for another very fun episode talking about a very unfun year. But
Yeah.
I appreciate all your insight as always. So thank you.
Of course. I mean, it's been an honor to join you, for all these episodes. And again, let me just say that I think this entire podcast series has just been extraordinary, what you're doing, revisiting all the Best Picture nominees. I think this is going to go down as one of, the all-time great movie podcasts, and it's just essential listening for anybody who's into this stuff. So it's really been a true pleasure to join you, throughout these years on this.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. I will just say that I appreciate all of your knowledge, as always, through, again, like many, many decades of Oscar history. I can always rely on you for some expert insight because you have really sort of studied this stuff for years, even more than I have. So I'm only as good as the guests that I have, and you're one of the best. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin.
Yes. And where can people find more from you on the internet?
Oh, I'm on Twitter all the time, as you know, at Awards Connect. My blog is theawardsconnection.com. I'm also a contributor over at Awards Watch and also an occasional contributor over at Gold Derby.
Very good. And you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The show is at Oscar Runner Up. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you are a patron, thank you for being a patron. But if not, come join us. It's a lot of fun. We're at patreon.com/andtherunnerup and there are plenty of bonus episodes to dive into by now. So go ahead and do that. And with that, thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you, Kevin.
And I will bid you all adieu.